You could say that there are two biological conspiracies, the hormonal and the neural. The hormonal conspiracy is the alpha wolf syndrome. It is where the most aggressive wolves, the most aggressive men, are physically always in charge. Then there are two ways of considering that, or two ways of looking at it. And that is, if you're an alpha wolf type, you don't care. All you want to do is compete to get in a better position. And if you're not, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. I bring that up not only because it was tied into what we were talking about last time, but I'm about to tie it to what I'm about to talk about now. A certain aspect of this sort of activity always has been and still is, if it's being done correctly, and I'm not, as always, I point out I'm not simply referring to me as wonderful, as charming, as warm, as caring, as charitable, as important as I am. I'm not talking about me necessarily. Or if I do, I'm using me prototypically. I always say that because I don't know what it means and it throws me off. And so, well, it saves me from later taking me aside and saying, what the hell did you say that for? There's a certain aspect of this sort of activity that always has, and still does, has a certain, if you're ordinary, you could call it problem. Certain aspect. I said aspect. It has to do with this not having any natural opposition. And I would bet that some of you would find it interesting in theory and gossip if I engaged in some. But you should find it of most interest on a practical basis. And I will try and at least kick both of them, or dent a fender before the night's over. One is looked at historically, looked at collectively. This kind of activity has no natural opposition. Once you understand that, and I bet a lot of you have a lot better handle on it, before the night's over. And that is, it makes this sort of activity very nebulous in retrospect. Put more simply, you hardly ever hear of it. Or put another way, as I believe yours truly has pointed out, the forms of this kind of activity, the apparent forms of this kind of activity you do hear about, were actually pretty low rent. And they're always at least second generation. Always. But it has to do with this, having no natural opposition keeps it invisible to the ordinary eye, because the ordinary eye, and the ordinary eye is the ordinary mind, cannot see that which does not have an opposition to put it in a kind of juxtaposition in a 3D world so as to be seen. If it's just a statement that goes flying by, let us say, a statement that, insofar as possible, it's in your native language, but insofar as possible, it's a statement that, let's just call it impertinent to start with. Irrelevant. I mean, the sentence makes sense. The statement goes flying by, but it's something that's just almost unremoved from your daily life, from anything you ever thought about. It just goes whizzing by. And if very shortly something else does not come whizzing by right after it, going, hey, wait a minute, wait till I catch that son of a bitching statement. You know, that comes by hollering, did you say that statement just went by? And you go, yeah. And it goes, untrue. Since I get, then you can go, huh. But if it just goes flying by, and very shortly nothing comes by that says, hey, don't listen to that. If nothing else happens, that's sort of the end of it. I was going to suggest to you, as far as the gossipy history part that most people enjoy, there are several well-known stories. Socrates, Jesus, and a score of others that you've never heard of, which simply had local currency, that had to do with apparently someone involved with some sort of extraordinary activity that seemed to have no financial reward, that seemed to be only about people expanding their consciousness, their awareness, their mind, and their spirit, anything you will say for the time being. And in the midst of it, someone became, how's this for a turn of phrase, a Judas, since one of them's name was Judas. That worked out pretty good, didn't it? Well, they don't. That they had a traitor in their midst. Might I suggest to you, even if they existed, we're just using them mythologically and as gossip fodder, that if indeed, say a Socrates, and I'm just using that as an archetype, that if a man somewhere such as that was actually trying to have an impact on the greater Athens area, if he were trying to take his activities somewhat out of the neighborhood and out of the esoteric realm of a small following he may have had, or whatever the following was, the size, if he wants to expand it without public opposition, without ordinary opposition, there is a growth limit to anything. Not just this, but this is the only thing we're interested in. The only thing I'm interested in enough to talk about. If it is going any further, how's this for a little story, a little timeout? Someone like Socrates would understand enough that he would have to set up a Judas. He would have to get somebody to go, hey, go around to the Senate and start complaining about me. Start writing letters to the editor, but don't throw them at the editor. If you recall, that one of the problems they had with exposés back then is when you would write an intelligent philosophical missile and toss it out, it in fact became a missile. And I'm not sure if I enjoyed that enough last time. It's just one of the self-regulating self-defense mechanisms of life. That is, you remember my little story was that I was playing the time of Rome or Athens, and they were writing these broadsides, these exposés, like Thomas Paine was attempting to do somewhat a few years later in the great United States. But they were trying to expose the corruption there and the crumbling Roman Empire. And so they would write them on these little stone tablets, which is all they had, and they would ride down the street in their chariots hollering, here's Caesar exposed. And people, who would like one? And people would go, me. And so the very people that could have done something about it, and they'd holler, me, and they'd throw them one, most of them got hit with it. And it'd knock them out or kill them. And so the very ones that might have caused the government trouble, that is life, are the very ones that were eliminated. Or at least dazed to such condition when they awoke, they thought they were an insurance salesman, or they thought they were in politics. But a Socrates, had he wished to expand the activity, he would have sent someone. He would have had to. There are several ways to do it, but the most efficient would be to go to the government and to try to create an expose, to begin to have somebody attack him, attack the activity. We've got to do something about this. It is dangerous. It doesn't matter exactly what the basis of the accusation is, but there must be opposition raised. Which, I might add, takes some doing, because normally, we're going to get to specifics now, but normally getting opposition is no real, shall we say, backbreaking affair. No. If you don't believe it, just try anything publicly. Go out and open up a little stand out here that says, Omaha's freshest grapefruits. I mean, a big sign. That'll be your stick. That'll be your mystical system. That'll be your attempt to do something extraordinary. For the first time in Omaha, fresh, yes, fresh grapefruit. Very shortly, assuming that you are right there on a public thoroughfare and people they begin to stop and buy your grapefruit, somebody, Safeway, A&P, Kroger, somebody else with a fruit stand is going to begin to oppose you. Either come bomb your place, write letters to the paper, call the governor's consumer office, charging you with unfair advertising. It's not true. Somebody will oppose it. But there are certain kinds of activity, such as this, that getting opposition is not that easy.
No.
Socrates sends somebody. He tells one of these guys, Zeno, go over there, because we need to expand this. Go over there to the Senate and start, find your local senator and tell him about me. Just say anything you want to. Just get his attention. Say, do you know there's a dangerous guy over here? He's talking down, the gods and politics. Well, he's just questioning everything. Everything. Nothing seems sacred. So Zeno says, all right, I'll try it. He goes over there. And you might think, well, that'll be easy to do. It's not.
No.
There's a fine line we're going to get to in a minute if you don't already see it. Now, if somebody just walked up to a Caesar or Caesar's secretary and said, by the way, do you know that there's a guy over there that they're building bombs and they're planning to attack the center? They're on Caesar's birthday, the next big festival. They're planning to start throwing spears and an actual physical uprising. You'll see some action then. But now, just to go over there and say, there's a guy over there that's just a guy named Socrates or a bunch of people, and they're holding up, they're talking about everything you can imagine. Yeah? Well, they just talk about that stuff. Well, are they slandering Caesar? Well, no. Are they threatening to take over the government? No. Well, what are you here for? Well, I don't know. Something should be done. You should look into it. Well, that's my job of looking into dangers to the state, or the dangers to Caesar, slice the state. But what are they doing? Tell me, give me the specifics. And it's a slow week. I'll tear them a new asshole. What are they doing? And Zeno has to go, can I get back with you? And he goes back, and he says, I didn't get anywhere. At first they said, come right in. We're in charge of uprisings, the suppressions thereof. But I couldn't seem to get their attention. At any rate, if you do notice, the literature of ordinary minds is strewn with these situations of apparent martyrdom, wherein somebody was handed over to the Philistines, handed over to his opposition, to his foes, the Socrates. But it's always or Jesus, and it's always, though, it's got to be that there was a traitor. And what I was going to point out to you is, if it happened, which is they say it did, as most of you heard, if there was, Jesus is probably a better story to use an example. If it were, as you've always heard, or if it is, as I assume it's reported in the Bible, then I assure you that Jesus was sent there. Apricot, what was his name? Judas. It's an old Alabama quote joke, Judas Apricot, but well, even people in Alabama thought that was a funny name. Of course, that guy's named Bubba Okra, so what do they know? And I assure you that this guy, Judas, was sent over there by Jesus to turn him in. Now, it could have gotten out of hand, but now the question I was going to present to you are the dynamics, the situation. This kind of activity, now down to a personal level, an individual level. If someone was out talking today, a Socrates, or somebody was out talking this kind of stuff, ordinary people find it not only difficult to relate to, but they find it difficult to relate to on the basis that they find nothing to oppose. Now, it certainly may not be that a person would say, well, that's not why I found a lack of interest. That's why I didn't pursue it. It wasn't because I didn't oppose it. I don't mean that they would say that. But it's really they cannot get even the slightest finger hole somewhere on the side of the building, on the mountain. And I'm going to tell you why, and those of you who can hear it, it should make your brain, at least the blood therein, run warmer, at least for a little while. Because it is quite personal. It's quite individual. If you ask somebody, just an ordinary person, if you had been around, if the Senate had sent somebody to spy on Socrates, and Socrates was standing around talking, and you ask them later, maybe you were there, and for the first time somebody heard Socrates talk. I'm just using him, remember, archetypically, I don't mean anything specific. I'm just a name. And you ask them later what they thought about it. And it would just seem to be an intellectual, rational, ordinary person. About the best they would come up with, they'd say, well, it's kind of weird. It's strange. Words like that. I'm using, of course, I know they spoke Greek in Greece, but I'm using the kind of words that would go on today. Somebody said, well, I don't know, it's kind of, I don't know, weird. Weird how, you know? Well, just kind of weird. Well, I mean, specific. You got a specific weird? Well, kind of weird. They would find it hard to oppose anything I have said, to criticize it, which is the same thing. And I'm going to tell you why. And it's not because I said it, it's because of the nature of what this kind of activity is. See, because this is getting into that which is yet to be widespread. It is not the biological conspiracies of hormonal, wherein the alpha wolves always take over. And their only opposition is useless. Because biologically, things are as they should be. But what is not under consideration, what is never discussed by even the most literate, most serious conspiracy theorist is the neural alpha wolf conspiracy. Because it is not taken into consideration. I didn't lose you already. Because I'm going to time together what we're talking about. In the ordinary world, in the world of Caesar, in the world of God, in the church, in politics, in government, in your local community, it is alpha wolves who physically run things. They're the most aggressive. They run it. And you can be dumbwitted enough to complain about it and take your complaint seriously and sit around and pout and get high blood pressure if you want to, because it's a free planet. It's not just a free country, it's a free planet. Even Stalin could not stop people from having strokes, from having political epilepsy or epoxy or whatever it is. Political conniption fits, if you want to really get technical. You know. Even Mussolini, try as he might, could not legislate out ulcers and high blood pressure. So you can fret all you want to. But the alpha wolves run things. The alpha wolves become pope, they become president, they become legislators, they become judges, they become businessmen, they become the bankers, not the tellers, they become the bankers, they own it. It is nothing but physically, biologically, alpha wolves. Why are you going to waste your time? If you are one of them, then you're out there, you're going to be competing. The only complaint you've got is that you're not yet president, or that you're not yet high enough up, but you don't have a complaint about the structure. You understand the structure. You got to fight your way in. And contrary, to look at it from a most profitable, even canine, from a profitable canine position, if you're not of an alpha wolf type, there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. Yeah. So lighten up. You know, if you want to. You know, if you're a wimp wolf, you can sit around and whine, you can slobber on your paws, you can write letters to the editor, you can get together little groups in your neighborhood, and, you know, stick your tongue out at pictures of the alpha wolves that are running everything, but you can't do a goddamn thing about it. So there you are. The situation is taken care of. Always has been, still is. It is discussed, it is opposed, it is wrestled with, it is the basis, from one view, of all the conspiracy theories, because in a sense there is a conspiracy, and that is the alpha wolves, as they're now calling them in zoology. The alpha wolves run it. They're selfish, they're the most aggressive, but they work for life. They look after themselves, as I was mentioning last time, is the kind of exposed folly of people saying that they can't believe to find out that someone in a position of authority, position of power, has misused, as they call it, that is the non-alpha wolves, they call it the misuse of power. And what the hell do you think they got in power? What do you think they're there for? Those in power, the alpha wolves, look after themselves no less than does life itself. Who is whom they work for? What do you expect? Life looks after itself, and the ones it turns around, the straw bosses, the plantation runners, the managers, the straw bosses, you think they're not going to look after themselves? Life's going to pick out somebody that's self-destructive? and turn over a country, turn over a planet to a bunch of wolves that are going around and bite off their own tails, chew themselves until their hair falls out, have strokes, stand around, can't decide whether to attack a pack of wildebeest, and they get uncertain. What do you expect? Those who attack the situation biologically, physically of life as being unfair and try to expose it, they expose one thing: their dim-wittedness. They expose that they are a wolf. So that's not going to change. Everything is just right. Insofar as there being a neural hierarchy, you got to think about it. That's what that means. Either that or I got palsy. You got to think about it. Is there a neural hierarchy? And you might at first say, yeah. And then I might say, you answered too fast. Why can't people find a real something to oppose? Now let's just take what I've been talking about the last 25 minutes. If an ordinary person had been listening to this, take away any possible exception that I made some joke that they wouldn't like, that they thought, well, wait a minute, you picked on Greeks. Extract all that stuff that you know is innocuous and I just use as hit and run examples. And try and extract me from it, that they don't like my looks or they figure I'm too charming for my own good. Extract all that. Just take what was said. The neural impact, the neural info. Why is it that they would, just tonight, just picking at random, why is it that ordinary, reasonable people, that let us say they listen attentively for the last 25 minutes, why is it that they cannot find anything to actually oppose? I will now answer that question for you. Yes, you? Because should they neurally jump into the fray of this, just jump in somewhere, it's all right, wait a minute, you went too far. I can. What? You did just say something that I can oppose, that I can legitimately oppose. If they did, they would reveal one thing, and they do not understand this, but life does, because it would be counterproductive. But should they jump into something that is not based upon the furtherance of a binary system, of a tango between two opposing forces to no avail, to no specific avail, not neurally, to jump in the middle just anywhere and to criticize, to oppose part of it, would only reveal one thing. It would only show one thing. If they went, wait a minute, if they started taking apart what I just said about the alpha wolves and the structure of all of human institutions, all of the civilization of humanity, they went, wait a minute. And they began to try and pick out one other part, some piece of that, and oppose it. And to try and argue that it wasn't true, they would reveal only one thing. They would expose only one thing, not me. All they would be exposing is that if they were correct, if they said, wait a minute, what you just said about the structure of civilization and man's institutions, there's part of that that I believe I can show you is not true. If they apparently did start mounting some reasonable argument, and what they would hear without knowing it, and what other people would hear was if, for a split second, what they said was correct at my expense, all it would show was that man is dumber than everyone else thought he was before this person opposed it. God, I was afraid of that. Try it this way. I'm talking along, apparently, just use my description for a second, just objectively pointing out things that people do not think about. And it's not an attack. I keep overly so pointing out that what I just said or what I'm about to say is not a criticism of this particular thing, so don't listen to it in that manner, but consider that people never look at this and that situation in this or that manner. So let's assume I'm going along doing that, and this fictitious person I've named, trying to show you why this sort of activity is never widely known, is never widely popular, and I was pointed out to you in the beginning because there is no natural opposition to it. One of the reasons on an individual level that there would not be, that if I am just talking along and it was in this kind of manner that many people would say, well, that's kind of weird, kind of strange, but they don't know what. Is it offensive? No, it's just weird. if they did try to get beyond that and say, well, I can pick out parts of that and legitimately, reasonably, intellectually oppose something you said, something you pointed out. If they could, if they said, all right, stop right there, and they picked out something and said, contrary to what you said, I think such and such about man and his institution or whatever we were talking about, he wouldn't know it. But if he began to, just in a few seconds, began to mount what sounded like a reasonable verbal opposition to something I had said, he just stopped me talking, like froze it, and he said, all right, let's take this. And he began to take it out and said, for instance, right here. And he began to do what sounded like a legitimate opposition, critique of that. All it would do is this. It would make man in whatever position, let's say it was religion or politics. And he started saying, well, what you said is not exactly true. Let me point this out. And he starts, it could be quite literate, based on historical facts and figures and events. And he says, here's what I blah, 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 blah. He wouldn't know it, but it wouldn't be but just Pingita time. That all he would do was make man look dumber than he would have been before the man started. You understand that if his criticism, not just of me now, but of this kind of non-biased, non-partisan, point-blank detailing of life, if it is stopped in some aspect, it doesn't matter what, is extracted, and somebody tries to hold up and say, now wait, now here's an example where this is not true. Or what you're saying is not exactly on the money, you're exaggerating, or you're not giving man credit, or you're giving him too much credit, and here's why. And they go, blah, 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 blah. It wouldn't take but a few seconds, and they would sound to themselves, to their mind, like they begin to show me up. They would go, blah, 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 blah. And they wouldn't know why, but they realized, wait a minute, they're making man up to be a bigger dumbass. In other words, they're defending man. Well, they start off thinking they're attacking what they were going to say, wait a minute, you are attacking man, or you're not attacking religion or politics. And I'll show you why. Because, blah, 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 blah. It's like they started out, of course, they're trying to do themselves like, wait a minute, all you point out is not necessarily true, because here's what I think. And they start talking, and here's what I think suddenly begins to make them look dumb. I don't mean that I'm right, because I didn't say anything that they could oppose legitimately. It's why they don't. But if they did, and it's not me, it's they begin to make themselves / man. The point is, if their contrived opposition to something that was said in this kind of activity, if it began to almost sound correct, simultaneously all it would do was, as they begin to think, wait a minute, I'm getting somewhere. Or maybe somebody in the audience goes, boy, he's got him now. Just almost as soon as that happened, it slides kind of sideways like a car getting out of control on a curve. And you think, wait a minute, if that's true, that makes things worse. That if that's true, if he apparently has, in defiance of what the guy said, defiance of what Socrates said, this guy over here said, wait a minute, point of order, and he brought up a criticism, and it was beginning to sound like, hey, he got the old man. He's about to show him up. The closer they get to that, the more it begins to lose traction in the rear wheels. And it would strike the people around, and they would quickly lose interest also, but for a split second to strike them, wait a minute, even if he's right, and old man Socrates is wrong, what he's saying, if he's right, he hadn't accomplished anything. If he's right, then man's in a worse position than we thought. He should have shut up to start with. It's better off to let it go. That's why. Whether you understood it or not.
Yeah.
Play like you did. It's my birthday. Now what makes it so difficult with an individual is exactly the same thing. We don't have to stretch for metaphors. I've been stretching now for 33 minutes for the metaphors and the symbols. It's in here. It's why this has always been, and still is, but why you can find what literature there is replete with all the would-be seekers and would-be mystics, praying to the gods and the cosmos and the spirits and dead saints, like my heart is, my hunger for whatever this is tearing me apart. Somebody help me, respond to me. The mind. You try and think about that which you've never thought about, and it's like it went by. And you thought, God, that was almost, let's say it was almost an astounding transcendental thought. Seemed to run through your mind. We're back to 34 minutes ago. You hadn't forgotten. It goes, boom. And at first you might be almost semi-sorely astounded. Woo! But how about this? It was so, to you, to your normal mode of thinking, it was so transcendental. It was so meta-gnostical, beyond ordinary knowledge and experience, meta-empirical. And you, oh! And it was like nothing in your system, nothing in your mind, naturally sprung up and go, wait a minute. And it's like you lost it. Remember where we started? Some of you laughed like you understood it. That this great statement, at the time I wasn't defining or modifying it, but this statement goes by that's almost something you never heard. And you're waiting if another statement doesn't come along saying, don't listen to that statement, I'll be back in a minute, or I'll tell you why. You know, it's blowing a whistle like, stop that statement. If you wait and nothing goes by, it's gone. You will literally forget it. Which is, again, I pointed out, is you have much of the so-called mystical literature is also composed of people doing nothing but absolutely crying, tearing their heart out over having the experience once, and now they can't get it back. They can't even verbally put together what it was that they pictured through a period of hours or days when they had the experience. And now the rest of their life they wring their hands and sometimes have to stoop so low as to make a living out of wringing their hands in front of other would-be mystics. But the rest of them say, well, at least he had it once. Didn't he? Well, he said he did. Okay. In your own mind, which, if I may refer you back to my fairy tale, which perhaps we can quit even noshing about that it was a fairy tale, that everyone at one time's already had the experience. That everyone has that 1 second that you are face to face with the big guy himself, not God, not Allah, point blank reality. And it looked you dead in the eye, you looked at it and blinked. You were supposed to, and that was, you're out of there. Next. So everyone's had the experience. That, you could say, is the beginning of it. Because most people, the majority of the world, to say the least, has forgotten it. And if I started taking that as some sort of literal crusade, if I started trying to say, well, listen, people should give up the ideas of wasting their time meditating or going to church or the idea of God, because I'm going to tell you what it is, and I gave them that story, not as a fairy tale. I said, here is what happens to people. At the very first second, individually, as each person becomes intellectually lucid, when the cortical intellect, the neocortex, fires up, and you had your first thought as a human, I don't care what it was, but when your brain itself actually turned into a mind, turned into a human consciousness, at that split second, every human on this planet that was genetically, physically, in reasonable shape, you looked into these, and fill it in for yourself, folks, I'm talking to the public now, you looked into the eye of God. You looked into the Big Bang. You looked into the origins of the universe, of life itself. You looked at reality as it is, and it looked at you. That's what this was. Animals don't look at it. They don't have to. They live it. But we have a mind. We have to look at it and think about it. And everybody, you aren't just, life didn't throw you out there neurally in a wilderness any more than it did physically. Physically, it put you where? In paradise. It put you on the planet where we belong. It put the bears there, the tigers there. It put us here biologically, hormonally. It also put us in the right place neurologically. It didn't just throw you there and leave you, like some of the would-be mystics and washed-up saints and people like, oh, we're on the far corner of the universe and we've been cursed and thrown out of the garden. You know, that's Hansel and Gretel. That's witches under the bed. You should be past that. Life did not throw us out in an outpost. Life put us right where we belong and told you. Because at that very second, like I said, hormonally, it's not in question. You got to be an idiot not to know we're in paradise. When I say paradise, we're where we belong. You look around, what you can do with a $100 telescope. It's obvious we don't belong on the moon, on the sun, on Mars. We belong here. Hormonally, physically, it's right where we belong. This is it. Up here, people, that's when they start complaining. Well, we're cut off from God. We're cut off from the universe. I'm telling them. See, I'm still doing my theoretical sales pitch to the public. I say that's not true, because every human on this planet, when your neural cortex fired up, when simultaneously with the first thought you ever had as an individual, whatever it was, right that split second before, when life did it, it's like, the big Michelangelo of God touching Adam and firing everything up, looking at it neurally. When it did that, you were looking into the eye of blank, whatever you want. I'm just calling it reality as it is. It looked right at you and you looked at it. And I'm still talking to the general public. And I say, but notice, you don't remember it, do you? And if they were taking it seriously up until then, I had the right kind of trappings and they were listening and trying to, everybody would have to admit, no, I don't. Now, many people start saying, well, I've always thought there was something in my past. Now, I don't mean just crackpot New Agers and occultists. Many reasonable people, they feel like, there is something in my past, which is why the stories of paradise lost and being thrown from the garden, being driven from a place of paradise, is why it will fly. It's why those stories, those myths will go anywhere on this planet. It's for that very reason. But if I said, you don't remember doing it, you don't remember actually, just looking, and you saw what life was. I'm talking to the public now again. That, all the dreams of people thinking, trying to take drugs or have mystical experiences and praying and fasting, and the people that say that they have actually, their spirit, their soul became one with God. People go, yeah. The whole idea, whether you take it literally or metaphorically, it is something in the human spirit, the human mind, that feels as though it needs a greater answer, an understanding of life. And my crowd goes, yes, yes. And I say, but I'm telling you, it is not something that far removed. It is not something that is foreign to you, because each and every one of you have already been through it for that split second. And they go, well. All right. If that be true, which it is, then when this kind of information is presented, if you didn't like the alpha wolf example, if I use this, how can you oppose that? I mean, you could say, well, I don't believe it. There's not much of an opposition. You're not going to anything going. But then in your own mind, what it amounts to when you start getting close to having what used to be called those kind of transcendental experiences, when you begin to actually expand, when you begin to be able to be conscious without being simply dependent upon words, your ordinary thoughts, that you're not eating yesterday's meal, your mind is not simply running off the energy of what you've thought before, your memories. The experience. Somewhere close to it, you start having your own thoughts, which is part of what I try to do for you on these times that we get together, and I talk in ways that some people say, that's weird. But you begin to have those kind of thoughts that go by. And this is it. This is what I've been living for, this is what I've been after, and I go. And it seemed so great momentarily, but then it seemed like, well, I lost it. It went away, I couldn't hold it, there's something I'm not doing right. I should try harder, I should have more often, all that's okay. I'm not saying that's not true. But I am not trying to tell you physically what the problem is. They have no opposition. If it still sounds too strange, let me use everyday parlance, which I don't normally do. But since we're spiders and flies, why not? The truth, this is what ordinary people like to say. I don't like to say it, as you know. But the truth has no opposition. Now, I don't normally say the truth because you know how that goes. You might as well be saying God and religion. What I would normally be referring to is point-blank reality, objective reality. But back to what ordinary people, the way they would be inclined to put it. And I'm just talking to you now so that give you every opportunity to see what I'm talking about. These kind of thoughts that you're staying around, sitting around, just out of a clear blue sky, something happens. You start to say something. Somebody says something. Your mind starts replying and criticizing. Just the ordinary state of affairs internally, neurally. And at times something suddenly strikes. I'm not going to give you a sentence, but an idea strikes you. An idea may not be anymore that's almost nonverbal. Somebody's saying something, maybe you're watching two people talk. One of them says one thing, and the other one goes, oh no, and they say one thing, and you realize that your mind None of this is the point, you understand. I'm just having to make up an example. And your mind would normally take one side or the other, which is not the point, you understand. But it's almost suddenly you look and you see the kind of dance going on. And it's non-verbal. You simply see there's nothing to say. It's a tango. It's alpha wolves fighting with wimps. It's life. It's the sun coming up. And it's not natural. It is not normal for you. That is almost a mystical experience neurally, which is the only kind. But it is as though you saw just objective reality. No prejudice, no opinion, no partisanship. You just saw it. And there's really nothing to say when I say it's a thought. That's why I sometimes try to distinguish and use the words consciousness and thought. Because you don't really think, the closest thing to think is, you realize there's nothing to think about that. In other words, it was not some term, it was not a sentence, which is the way the mystics after the fact normally have to come up with it, and those that dream about it, that yes, I fell into a trance, or I was in a mystical state for 2 weeks, and I got over it, I don't know what happened. Well, what did you get from it? Well, of course, I lived many lifetimes there in that 2 weeks. Yes, I know, but what can you tell us about it? Well, it's like I flew through the heavens, went into the universe. Is there anything you can tell us to benefit? Well, I did understand this without any doubt. I could condense it all down to I understood God is love. In other words, they always come out with a sentence, an idea. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. And that's not it. But that's what they come up with. That's what they get down to. But now back to you. It is not when you begin to see things as they are, they do not come in actual sentences. It's not that you go, well now I see that those people are wrong. It's more like, if I got to put words, you're seeing something that you would normally see that one side was either right or wrong, or it was weighted more on their side, or, well, yes, I knew that. And the closest thing neurally or verbally to describing this kind of at least nascent versioning mystical experience is not that somebody's right or somebody's wrong. It's like, or I see. Okay? That is like a mystical, transcendental statement flying by. Now try and oppose, or compare this, not oppose it, compare that with such things as God is the dark matter of the universe. Which you can go, well, I mean, it has the trappings, it has the possibility of being occult, metaphysical, New Age, but what if your statement is, I see? No, that's your mystical. But it is, you look out and you see what's going on. You're a witness, you're right there in the middle of life, as if a fish could get out of the water, and there you are. And it's sort of a standing up, non-monastic, fleeting mystical experience. Not the big one, but a little one. Not the big stroke, but a little one, like a mini stroke. But it amounts to, I see. So that's your mystical experience for the day. And here it goes. But I'm not downplaying it. It's astounding to be able to look around and go, well, I see. No. Because nobody else can. Everybody goes, everybody else, they do things like, oh, I see. Okay, I see. But not I see. So here's your mystical experience. It goes, I see. And it goes by. Now remember, that's your mystical experience. There is no follow-up. It is astounding when you have it. When it strikes you, I see. And you can drag it out. Hopefully. I'm on your side. I hope it lasts an hour, a day. But it goes by, and it does finally. It's like a float on a non-scheduled parade. It goes by it's like a rocket float. It's why people are always so astounded by it. Even those that have sat in one position in a monastery for 50 years, when it happens, they're just as astounded as somebody that's out at a bar about to say, oh, give me a beer. And they look up in the mirror and see something went on the other side of the room, and they're about to get drunk and lower their consciousness and go, and they suddenly see something. They're as astounded as the guy that worked 50 years to get it. They're both just astounded. So here it is. It's like an unscheduled parade goes through your mind. It's this float. But it's rocket powered. It goes, I see. And as I said, it may carry you for an hour or a day. But it finally, it's like it gets out of sight. The smoke of it, it finally goes so far past the horizon, your memory of it. You may remember the words of I see. Because there probably will be something verbally you'll remember. It might not be what you said, it might be what somebody else said, that two people are arguing about something or discussing. And one of them says, well, be that as it may, but a man's soul should not be trifled with. I'm just making up something. And it's not the words you understand, but it's suddenly you see. And that may be all that's left. That one thing becomes like a temporary verbal talisman to you. It is, you keep saying the words. You just repeat their words. A man's soul is not something to be trifled with. Because that is what you heard at the time you had the experience. So I don't mean it's just something you said. The words are not important, except your mind will hold on to it. That's all the mind can do. And as this state of consciousness begins to wear back down, and you start drifting back down to where consciousness amounts to no more than thought, which is where you're supposed to be. That's the normal state. That is this experience getting out of sight, even the words. But you can remember the words. Either what I made up of I see that you may have said, or it's the words, this rocket-powered float. That's the only thing left that you can remember. It's finally gone. It's the next day, 2 days later. And it's a man's soul is not to be trifled with. That for 2 days, every time you'd repeat that, when you felt it kind of slipping, you'd repeat it. And it was almost like being able to get another jolt that you'd been on some kind of drug, and it's like you could bring yourself back up just by repeating a man's soul is not to be trifled with. Not that the words mean anything, but it was tied to the experience. But then finally, it gets so far out of sight that even the words mean nothing. There is no natural opposition. It eventually goes away because there was nothing to oppose the truth. There was nothing to oppose a point-blank look at, oh, I see. To do it on your own, and that's why I don't say things like the truth, because there's nothing to prove. I'm not here to, I can't say, if somebody was listening to this, say, all right, I've really liked this tonight, tell me what the truth is. What the hell you think I've been talking about? There's another way. I got a news item coming up next time we meet. It's about a father tells a son. This whole thing about it being a secret, and he said the secret's right before your eyes, which is not a, even I've said that, but you can fill in the punchline between now and Friday. Well, I'll give you part of the punchline. He tells his son, all this kind of activity and all the work about it, the secret is right before your eyes, but I don't tell you this to make you feel bad, comma. Tune in Friday. There is no natural opposition in you. Now, if it's ordinary people, they will look out there, is why I was suggesting to you that a Socrates or a Jesus, those kind of stories, they have to invent it. They have to produce it. Because there's none out there. If there was such a thing as the truth, which everybody from ordinary religious people to politicians to social commentators out there in the city, they're continually staying up hollering what we need is a bigger dose of the truth. What we need is the truth. We need truth in politics. We need truth everywhere. If there was such a commodity as the truth verbally, and somebody got up, a Socrates, or a stranger, somebody you never heard of, and there was this thing that the truth, which would simply be some version, some telling, some isolated telling of point-blank reality, if somebody got up and said it, if there was a fanfare, so-and-so's going to be here and tell the truth finally, and the city shows up, and he gets up and he tells the truth, it would be as though this thing went by, even if somebody heard it. If somebody in the crowd, it would go by, and he says, all right, here's the truth, you came to hear the truth, and go, yeah, all right, here it is, and he goes, blah, 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 blah. And they'd fidget a little bit, and finally he'd say, well, that was it. That was all. And they'd go, they might be, if he was known, or if he was, a few people might go, well. But it'd be very perfunctory. The point is, the crowd, once they understood, if he said, well, that's all, thank you for coming, they'd all go, well. And people begin to sort of, mill about like, and drift off. You would not hear cries of criticism. You'd not hear fraud. That's not true. How dare you bring such a canard to the public's attention? What a dangerous thing to say. It would be that they would, as a matter of fact, do a lot of blinking, if you'd like to tie that back into my fairy tale, if the truth could be put in words. And the guy went, well, here is the truth. Not an isolated telling of reality, the truth, and goes, da 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 da. It should be less than 5 words, but you understand, I'm just he's going, all right, here's the truth. Now I'll go, yes. He goes, da 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 da. Now I'm doing the crowd. I'm doing all reasonable people. And they'd go. Well, they would keep glancing up at him for a few minutes for some clue, like what they're supposed to do. Like, is he going to say more? Because now they would blame it out there if they had to explain it. But it's in the human nervous system. There is no natural opposition to reality. It is all invented. You've got to get somebody to come up with it. And there is none to, quote, the truth. That's why people can't say it. Oh, they can say it, but nobody hears it. It just goes away. And plus, there is no the truth. They're simply isolated, which you're left with words, you're left with the spatial requirements or limitations of being alive here. I can't tell the truth. If I could tell the truth, I'd do it once and that's it. We just keep talking about this and that and all kinds of shit, just anything you can come up with. Because all you got to do is look around and there's the truth, there's the truth. What are you going to talk about? Sports, auto racing, people in Alabama. Now let's talk about people in Greece. Well, all right, doesn't matter. How about people 2,000 years ago? Okay. How about right now? Fine. And that's the danger, as I was saying, that's the problem why people will not jump in, because if you're detailing the objective nature of life, then you're not telling the truth, because what people say is the truth is a sentence, an idea. And this sort of thing, you would think, well, it's like people used to religion. Well, this should be the cache, this should be the source of the truth. And if not, then this sort of stuff, real mystical activity, should be the fountain, the storehouse of the truth. Well, yes, it is. But you don't need it, because it's not locked up. Look around. Well, where? But if ordinary people tried to find something to criticize with this, you understand, I'm not talking about anything. I'm not telling the truth about that. But if they say, well, wait a minute, you said I couldn't find any way to legitimately oppose anything, you say, wait a minute, stop right there, let's talk about that. Do you understand what they've done? They have now isolated reality. They can begin to oppose one thing, but what I'm saying, if they tried on that basis, it wouldn't accomplish anything. But it would strike them very shortly. They wouldn't know why. They'd get very uncomfortable, like, I wish I hadn't stuck my foot in this. Because they'd start trying to say, wait a minute, let's move back to what you said 10 minutes ago about stock car racing. In all sports, wait just a minute. You wait a minute. Let's go back to that. And they go, blah, 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 blah. And what they wouldn't understand is they're beginning, they have chopped up my detailing of the truth, which is everything, not the truth, just a rambling, just a surveying of reality as it is. And they go, no, 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 wait a minute. They have to stop it. They have to freeze it, and they have to pick out one part, and they begin to show how I could be wrong. Of course, it's not me. What they're saying is what you got to understand. What they're beginning to do is to take reality, and they've taken it back to the level of having to mold it and try to twist it and turn it into Gumby and say, wait a minute, I'll show you why it's wrong. And what strikes them without them knowing it is, I shouldn't have done this. Because if I'm right, all I'm doing is make man look worse than I thought he was to begin with. Is the whole point. That's why they can't oppose it. There's nothing to oppose. The only way you can criticize something is it's got to be critical to start with. It does. It has to have some judgmental validity to you, to everybody, or else you can't oppose it. It is a statement that goes flying by, and it made sense. You heard the statement, the idea, and it could have even kind of impressed you. It went by so fast, or the wind kind of blew, or it was just like, well, I never thought of that. And if something doesn't come along to oppose it, you never will again. Because it goes. Well, there were several things tied in tonight besides the gossip. It's why this sort of thing, if you ever hear about it publicly, you're only hearing about a cheap version of it. A second generation version. Because the only way you hear about it, there had to be opposition. And not only this, the only way you hear about any school of philosophy, any economic theory, no matter how discredited, no matter how strong it was at some time in the past, anything that you still hear about had to have opposition. And the greater the opposition, such as somebody's martyred, somebody's murdered over it. Some nation has to go to war. Some civilization apparently is destroyed over their ideas, their principles, whatever it was. That's the only way you hear about it. If there is no opposition, you never hear about it. That's on the historical gossipy level. Now on this level, why ordinary people, everybody, back then and now, can't really hear it. Or the difficulty in hearing it to start with. It doesn't have anything to do with stupidity or intelligence either way. But they listen, and there is nowhere they can't get their hand in. They can't get their finger. Like, wait a minute. Stop this train a second. Stop this float. Let's talk about it a minute. For some reason, I like what you're talking about. I don't know why yet, but wait a minute. Let's discuss this one. Let's discuss literature. You brought that up. Let's discuss that. No, let's don't. Oh, yeah, let's do. Because as soon as somebody tells me that, as soon as somebody says, can I pick your brain? Could we discuss something you said about so-and-so? All I want to do is get out. Now, they may mean well, and they might be an interesting dinner companion if I was drunk. But what they've done is stopped. What they have done is always is stopped reality and go, wait a minute, let's discuss this part. And if I say, let's don't. Now, forget me and a person. Think about you. You try and think in a way that you never have. Or I keep using terms like nonpartisan, objective, non-opinionated, just point blank, and you go, yeah, I like the idea. Well, shit, everybody likes the idea. People use those terms like, well, boy, if we could just objectively look at life, think how much better off we'd be. And everybody in the crowd goes, yeah, damn right. In fact, we'll do something about those people that don't think like that. But, you're back in that quagmire. I shouldn't say quagmire. You're back in that fine city. You're back in Athens. You're back in Rome, Paris. You're back in the city. But you can't get your hand in. You go, well, if there's, this is weird. And they don't know why it's weird. And you say, well, is it something offensive? Well, no. Was it something you really disagree with? And then they really get at you. They go, no. And they don't know why, but they know, well, that's what makes it weird. Yeah. But you can also say, this makes it, I wouldn't do this to people, but you can say, all right, there's nothing that you really find offensive that you object to. No. All right, is there anything that really kind of excites you and that you want to support? Then that really, it gets them past edgy. Because then they realize, well, no, there's nothing I want to join, or you don't seem like you want me to join, or, maybe I would, jump in there and carry a membership card and join in, but I get a feeling that you're not going to ask me. Now we're getting somewhere. But it's not me. It's those kind of thoughts are not asking anybody to join because they're not necessary. If they were necessary, you would have known it when, and of course you people do, we'll assume. You knew it when life looked at you, and everybody else blinked, and you kept staring. But life still only had a second, but at least you didn't blink. Life, in a sense, blinked. Not really, but life just went next, send the next one, and you were gone. You know there's nothing to join. And you know there's nothing to oppose. But if there's nothing to oppose, then there's nothing to support. And people go, well, what's the point? Ordinary people. But I was trying to get down really specifically, since so many of you I know are so close and things keep happening, and you know that you can see on your own that since you're not tied to me and it's not a cult and you're not dependent upon me, as interesting it seems to be in the part I seem to play, there's always somebody doing it. If it wasn't me, it'd sometimes be somebody else. But then your own consciousness begins to do it. But it seems, to say the least, I'll speak on your behalf since number 72401's not here tonight. Can't hear amidst the clamor. We're all in the slammer. Nobody but Ben seemed to like that one last night. But I'll speak on your behalf. It seems so elusive that your own mind, you know you're getting up close. Well, you know it's dangerous that more and more what I say just sounds to be just makes absolute sense. Or at times, some night, I'll apparently go off on some new direction, and you can almost start putting words in my mouth before I get there. And if any of you thought about it, you got to tell yourself, if this is weird, then that's doubly weird that I'm beginning to think like him, or my mind will do it even before he gets there. I know. And yet it seems so elusive. But remember, and all of you had read this and probably done it yourself, the cries of the would-be mystics. Now, I'm not making fun of it, but it's the feeling like, well, damn, I want this so bad. And they end up, of course, having to personify it, and it always ends up in some kind of plea to God, or Allah, like, the God, somebody help me. But it's always believing that there is help out there, that there should be. of a God, a king, nowadays a computer program, software, that there's some help out there. There is no help out there. There's reality out there. There's a secret out there, and it goes by. But the mind has got to stop and go, wait a minute, they shouldn't have floats like this out here in the street. This thing's going too fast. That damn thing almost ran on my foot. There are children out here. Who put that float together? Was that a liberal put that? It has to do that. Then you've stopped reality, and the mind can deal with it. Either pro or con. Either have a stroke or don't have a stroke. Who cares? It's a free country, world. But your own mind is every time you start getting close to reality, and you start having what amounts to many strokes of mystical experience, of actually seeing reality, of back just staring at it point blank, there is no immediate follow-up to go, oh, ha, ha, now we're getting somewhere. Because if there is, you're back to the mind state anyway. And those of you that's been around enough, you know that's one thing. Every time you talk to me, is you got to hold off all matter, if you can, for as long as possible, any inclination to be critical. Because you're right, you go back to it anyway, naturally. But you can't have any sort of opinion about what you see, because as soon as you do, the parade is stopped. The float's shot out. You're back to your ordinary level. But conversely, or withal conversely, is the problem of ever getting it to going. Because it happens, and you think, I almost had it. And you're right. But there's no natural opposition in the nervous system, the neural system, to that. Which in the stomach, hormonally there is. There's opposition to, again, if you're a sane, ordinary person, there's opposition to you drinking strychnine. Natural opposition. There's opposition to you stabbing yourself. But up here, it's almost a free ride. That's why I said there is really no established comparable alpha wolf system neurologically as there is hormonally. It's almost every man for himself. Now I know there seems to be a neural hierarchy out there that ordinary people might say, well, there is. Those that have better education are in position of responsibility. No, you ain't got it. I told you the truth. It is still, nothing wrong with it, but it is still the biologically alpha wolves, the hormonal alpha wolves are running things. It's not the neural alpha wolves running things. They're lackeys. The big wolves pay them. The big wolves let them paint, write, play music, as long as they don't begin, to bug them. They don't, start getting pretensions like, well, hey, I might could be somebody, and they bite their head off. There is no neural hierarchy. Not out there, not in here. There is the, shall we say, small problem. That's why it seems so hard that you just know this is what I want, and I keep getting taste of it. I almost drool myself, and sometimes I even have them. And I wish I had your number. I wish I knew where you were at night. I want to call and say, I believe I got it. Let me ask you if this is it. Which is one reason that it's good that you can't get hold of me, because you would have blown it anyway. If you go, let me ask you this, because I'd go, no! So you thought I was laughing at these strangers when I said, when people used to stop me after a public appearance, say, hey, wait a minute, could we talk about such and such? And I think, let's not. Because even if they're close to something, they're about to blow it. Then I could say, well, all right, and I could do something or pat them on the head. But you guys, you'd be worse off if you actually sincerely did it. Like, I almost got it. I can't quite put the right words on it. Let me ask you if this is it. If I could reach you, if you get me on the phone, my hand would come through the receiver and go and tell you no. Of course, I understand what you're trying to do, but the thing is, it went by and there's no natural opposition, and you feel like I'm lost. But remember this: if you understand the situation, and you should now, at least better, then all is not lost, because nobody else understands the situation.